much for being here. It's a great pleasure. It's one of my absolute favourite places anywhere, not just in Melbourne, I think. So, meet David Walsh. Put this one over a bit, I think. How's that? Good. Because I need to look at my notes in case I have a sudden blank spot. Not about David. Age 54, father of 3, grandfather of 1, Hobart born and brought up and still based there, who in January 2011 opened his big new public museum for his personal art collection. And so far we've had more than 2 million people since 2011. Just this year, it's from interstate and overseas, probably about half of them. And just this year, 170,000 so far. And this is in a city with a population of only about 200,000, so we're quite pleased. As some of you will already know, and I hope that some of you have been there, but it's not a party-pooping thing for those who haven't. The Museum of Old and New Art, MONA, is built into the banks of the Derwent River. It's about 40 minutes north of Hobart by water, or 15 to 20 by road. The architect was Melbourne-based Nonda Katsalidis, and so far David spent, I believe, I read, at least $200 million on the building and the contents. He's been called a modern Medici. I'm not sure that he would claim to be a modern Medici, but he certainly he puts his money where his mouth is, as you will see more of that later. We show art from very ancient times right up to the present, with the kind of idea that all art was once contemporary. So we're looking at all art in equal terms, I guess. 6,000 square metres of exhibition space over 3 levels. Plus we also have changing exhibitions. We have 3 restaurants, a function centre, what else do we have? A winery, a brewery, festivals a couple of times a year, a summer market, environmental projects, a publications project and more. There's, as you've probably read, and I'll show you a bit more, a hotel on the way as well. So the collection ranges in date and place from ancient Greece and Rome and Egypt to New York, Australia up to the minute, Istanbul, Beijing, wherever contemporary art's being made. And it's not a collection of especially rare and individually rare and valuable things. I think the impact of the collection is really the sum of the parts. Everything in the museum is there because David's interested in it and wants it to be there. There's no program of acquisitions. There's no, we should have this kind of art, therefore we'll go and look for it. It's had an impact in the 5 years that I don't think David really expected, and certainly I, when I joined, didn't, nor my colleagues, when construction began in 2007. Another bit of the collection. So you can see ancient to modern all in one area there. MONA won Australian Tourism's 2012 award for the best new development, and it's been put about by Lonely Planet that Hobart was one of the top 10 cities in the world to visit because of MONA. What Lonely Planet called the world-class MONA Museum. And we've sent MONA-generated exhibitions so far to Paris and Sharjah and Los Angeles just in the last couple of years. So this is about where we were when I joined Hobart. This is the Marilla Estate, which was set up by Claudio Al Corso in the 1950s with 2 houses designed by Roy Grounds, who at the time was, really groundbreaking, no pun, modernist architect. And there we're digging in under that White House, right into the banks of the Derwent in 2007. Originally, the idea was that it would be built so much into the bank that you didn't really know what you were coming to, that you couldn't really see it from above. But David, as always, has changed his mind a bit, and he's what amounts to a great big lighthouse on the roof, that white thing, which I'll show you again in a minute. So the museum now, that's the edge of that White House. And the museum is all underground to here, and the library's down here, and the new bit that he's going to build is here. So yes, so it's really changed even since opening, from this thing that was hunkered down to this thing that's expanding in every direction. And this is typically evolvingly David. So there's the Tyrrell lit up on the skyline, which, the sky space up the top. So you definitely know it's there. And in fact, David's changed his mind over the time, over and over again, about what Mona is and what it's for and where it's heading. Last year, he sold, to my dismay, but you know, I understand these things, 4 really major contemporary works at Christie's in London, and he got a lot of money for them, and the reason was because he wanted to put this Tyrrell sky space up on top of the building, and it was going to cost a lot of money. Even before we opened, you probably read that we had John Brack's painting The Bar. He bought it when I was at Sotheby's, great sale, great achievement, and then he sold it to the National Gallery of Victoria because they said they wanted it so much and they missed out, and he decided, well, he didn't really want something that everybody else said they wanted, and that people would come down to Mona and say, where's the bar? And not mean the bar where they were going to buy a drink. So he sold it to the NTV for what he paid for it. That was also because at the time he'd seen Wim Delvoye's, oh sorry, that's the sky space auditor. So this does a cycle, dawn and dusk, of this beautiful, beautiful change in colours, and the sky actually changes as well. But the reason I was going to say is why he wanted to sell the bar, or why he decided he'd sell the Brack painting, was because he'd met Wim Delvoye and he decided he wanted a Cloaca Machine. This is the machine that replicates the human digestive system. You've probably heard about it. And this was the first Cloaca Machine that Wim ever actually sold, which is why it's called professional, you know, kind of like a professional worker. Because previously he'd only ever allowed museums to rent them out. So we bought one and it's specially installed. It's fed twice a day and usually defecates once a day. David thought that there would be quite a lot of backlash when Mona opened. In fact, he was kind of hoping for it. And our press fact sheet said, David hopes to shock and offend. In fact, most people aren't very shocked at all. I think most people are not really. Most people, if there's something they don't like, they turn around and there's something that they do like. In an exhibition like Theatre of the World, what's not to like? These amazing collection of bark cloths that we borrowed from the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery, never shown before, and put in Jaconetti and an Egyptian coffin. Our most recent exhibition, Gilbert and George, some people didn't like it very much, but they tell you a lot about life. And anyway, they'd never had a show in Australia before. It was Mona they chose to come to. And then we're planning one in November this year, for which we're borrowing works from the British Museum, the V&A in London, Houston Museum, a couple of French collections, and most of the Australian State and the National Gallery. A bit more on that one later. So people seem to approve to a certain extent, but David never wants anybody to really feel comfortable there. He says, from his point of view, the outside, I'll tell you about in a minute, David says he reckons that, quoting, the 90 trillion bacteria in his body are in no way interested in people's thoughts about Mona, but the very few cells in his body that constitute him are a bit chuffed. And if you want to read more of what he says, because he says stuff about what he thinks much better than I can, you should definitely read his published memoir, A Bone of Fact. It will tell you a lot, including his gambling secrets.
Excuse me, Jane, could you please speak into the mic?
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm going to put my notes here. I can see it. Okay. Really, his aim from the beginning has been to change people's mind and not tell people what to think, just to prod people into thinking. So this is Mona's library, seen from above, and that's at sort of the opposite end of the complex to the square house. And this was also designed by Roy Grounds for Claudio Corso's mother, and it is the most gorgeous house inside. And then it's got these wings added on, and Kiefer's Sternenpfeil installation in that square pavilion. And then behind the square pavilion is another work by Wim Delvoye, the digestion machine chap, and that's his chapel. So, and I'll show you something else we have of his in a minute too. Even before Mona opened, David staged a MOFO, a Festival of Music and Art, every summer. And for the last 3 years, we've also held a midwinter festival of dance and music and so on every year, and that will open in a couple of weeks, the 10th till the 21st of June. Billed as a cultural a pandemonium of cultural maelstrom or something. You can see it on the website if you're interested to come. And David, whilst he has obviously a huge team of people who put those festivals together, led by Brian Ritchie, American Museum, everything that happens there he will go to, he'll have an opinion on. He does now sometimes let things happen that he's not completely wedded to. He wasn't mad on the idea of Gilbert and George, but he still wants to see what happens. Mona really is David Walsh's personal experiment. And it's an evolving creature, like all species, including our own, that has no goal and no end point. Here's another interior view. This is Erwin Byrne's Fat Car, which is a real Porsche body. David chose the colour, which is very hard to move, so that's almost always there. It has to be craned in through the roof. For comparison, Mona is about the same size as the Art Gallery of Western Australia or the Queensland Art Gallery. It's a lot smaller than, say, the NGV or the Art Gallery of New South Wales. But we have just got approval for this new wing. So here's an architect's rendering of the new wing, which we cantilevered out, as I showed you in that aerial view. And that will house a number of more works by James Turrell, the fellow who made the sky space on the roof, and also a large work by Richard Wilson, a British international artist as well. So that, I think the building is meant to be starting later this year. As well, as you may have read, David is also planning a hotel and a casino, Monaco, to be designed by the maverick Mexican architect Javier Senosian. Now, David put this image on his blog, which you can have a look at, but the last image I saw of it actually was all multicoloured, so that's evolving too. I don't actually think that David expected at all to become this out-of-nowhere sensation, but he's really had this extraordinary amount of attention since the opening. And last year, as you may have read, he got the Order of Australia, which he contemplated not accepting, and then decided that it was at a higher level than somebody he wasn't that keen on in Tasmania, so he had to take it. So, I'm not going to speak for ages, and I'm only going to show you a bit of the collection. I will try to show you, but I won't discuss at length, works by Tapestry Workshop artists. And I'm sorry I haven't brought Mona food, wine or beer. Part of Mona's appeal, I think, for visitors and certainly for us that work there is that its physical footprint, the building, the context and so on, is the vision of one person. Our staff now have gone from what you could count on the fingers of a couple of hands to the many hundreds. At festival time, somebody told me we'll get up to 800 people, but I think that must include absolutely everybody that's involved. But I think we're something around 300 to 400 in the museum, plus the function areas around. He's shown that one person of comparatively modest origins, he came from a very modest family just along the road from Mona in north of Hobart, can have an idea or a swag of ideas, carry them off and take a whole lot of people along for the ride. I'm sure you've read, and I did mention that he makes his money from gambling. Basically, he doesn't go to the casino or go to the races. He's a mathematician. He developed these schemes when he was still a student at the university, because one of his still current partners said, how do we make money from your maths? And he says that he still really thinks all the time about the mathematics of gambling. So it's on the world, it's worldwide, and it's done essentially by computer algorithms. It fluctuates with the currency and it fluctuates with how things are going. Most of it is on horse racing, but done through computers. But it seems to be working, and long may it do so. There's still a lot left of that self-described nerdy kid who used to wag maths and go to the Tasmanian Museum and Art Gallery instead, and who apparently read his way through the Glenorchy Library. He's interested in just about everything. And Mona itself is, I guess, a kind of a gamble, and it's also, he says, his evolutionary peacock feathers. It's him showing off. Instead of, come up and see my etchings, it's come down and see my museum. So some of you, if you were in Tasmania as tourists in the 90s and early 2000s, might have seen David's first attempt at a museum. And this was the Museum of Antiquities, the Marilla Museum of Antiquities, and it was in that first square, Corso Grounds White House. As you can see, there were labels everywhere, and David wrote them. And I think as he was writing them, he was working out, he was learning about all these antiquities, coins, Egyptian things, ancient Roman, there's a ancient Scythian cantharos in the middle there. And it was dense with information. When you go to Mona now, there's not a label on the wall. It was actually quite popular in that if you look in the visitors book, people who got there absolutely loved this little museum. But as David said, quips, nobody came, so I built a bigger one. In the new and improved Mona, you can see there's not a label anywhere. There's absolutely no obligation to government. There's no board of trustees. In fact, David has said from time to time that if there was one, they'd probably sack him as their first act. There is government support for the music festivals and so on, though, I must acknowledge. He used to say that if it all failed, well, first of all, before it opened, he said, if nobody comes, I'll close it up and it'll be the best lounge room money can buy. Then he said, when people said, what's your long-term plan? He'd say, well, the Derwent will rise in 20 years and it'll be underwater. What he now says is because he's got 3 daughters and a grandson, he is thinking a little bit more about the long-term plans. That's why he was thinking about whether it was possible to have a board of directors, I suppose. But at the moment, he is thinking longer term, but I think there's still no planned end in sight. The sequence of collecting, as I mentioned, began with antiquities in general, but in fact the very first thing he bought was this door, the door of a grand house in Nigeria by the artist Ariogun. And he bought this almost accidentally. He tells this story in his memoir, and he's very, very fond of this door, partly because it's a kind of misunderstanding of things. The bicycle has no pedals, so it actually couldn't go anywhere. But he was gambling. He was in those days going to casinos and things in South Africa, and you couldn't take any more money out than you'd brought in. And he actually had quite a lot of money. And he'd seen this door, and he thought, well, I can't take the money out, but I'll take a piece of art. And it then had to get through quarantine in Tasmania, it's wood, so that took a very, very long time. And then he had it in his apartment, and then he put it into the little museum. And it was probably actually one of the biggest things he bought, but by that time he had coins and things as well. So this is, I think one of the reasons he's particularly fond of this is that it was this beginning of his interest in art and what all the stories, all the things it can tell us about the world and about ourselves. He then moved through antiquities and the Egyptians, things and so on, to the Australian moderns, and his Olsen, which I'm pleased to see this is similar just over there, is on the ceiling at the restaurant, and this is one of the Arthur Boyds, another tapestry workshop artist. And then, and an especial interest in Sidney Nolan, who he just thinks is fantastic, and then into contemporary art. And really, the major exhibitions, major acquisitions in the last few years have mostly been contemporary, partly because they've mostly come out of exhibitions where we've commissioned new works. Increasingly, as he planned the great big building, he realised that he was going to be able to fill all these spaces with much bigger art. Nell's little piece is tiny, of course, but bigger and bigger site-specific works. And in the middle of the building progress, he bought Sidney Nolan's Snake, which is 1,620 different and separate panels. It's 47 metres long, and Nonda actually had to put this curved wall through the middle of the building that was already planned because David bought it halfway through the project. This was a work that hadn't been seen since the 1970s. We hung a little bit of it at the National Gallery of Victoria for Nolan's 75th birthday, but we had such limited space, we actually couldn't get the snake to do this thing. It sort of went up and got cut off and down and cut off. And so Mary Nolan, Lady Nolan, was terribly keen to find this a home, partly because she needed the money for the Nolan Trust, but partly because Nolan himself considered this one of his really major works, and as I say, there just hadn't been a home for it until Mona. And people love it. We did take it down for a while and put a Japanese artist's work up instead, and we got lots of complaints. Oh yes, okay, so just getting to Mona can be exciting, and I recommend, if you haven't been before, that you come by one of our high-speed catamarans. You can drive, as I've mentioned, parking is in short supply, but if you come on the Mona Roma, you can have excellent coffee, champagne. You can go in the posh pit if you want to. You've got more money, but I actually think it's more fun to sit on the back of a sheep or a cow or whatever they are that they've got at the back and have your coffee. And you also get a really interesting story about what's going on up and down the river, including the zinc works, which David's wife Kirsha is a one-woman band trying to clean up the zinc and the heavy metals in the bottom of the river right at the moment. You cross a tennis court. Now this was a trade-off. Nonda wanted that reflective entrance. David wanted a tennis court. He plays tennis and table tennis. So Nonda said David could have the tennis court if he could have the reflective entrance. And we've got one. And then you go through this mirror-like entrance, which is over that White House, and it's a bit like Alice through the Looking Glass. You tumble down 3 levels, and it is a bit discombobulating. You're not meant to know where you are. There is a floor plan you can get, a little brochure, but you're really meant to wander and discover things where you want to. I mentioned that David particularly has been making acquisitions through exhibitions and so on. This is partly because he's become moving from collecting objects that exist already, obviously antiquities, to being part of the commissioning process. And I think part of this came from designing the museum as well and being part of something that he created. So, for example, when we bought the Cloaca Professional and he met Wim, he then decided we'd have an exhibition of Wim's work. So we had, I think it was at least 6 cloacas in the show, and we bought this flatbed truck, which came for the exhibition, and David decided to keep it there. And also in the exhibition was Tattoo Tim, whose tattooed back, or his skin, has actually been sold to a German collector, and part of that sale transaction is that Tim goes certain places during the year on display, and he's actually back at Mona this year. So he was at Mona for our exhibition in end of 2011, and he's come back for a few months now, and he will sit and show you his skin, which, as I say, has already been sold. This is an early commission. This was commissioned during the process of the building, where we realised that we had these quite small rooms, which we call catacombs, in a sort of mezzanine floor. And David met Brigitte Olsen, who's a local Hobart artist, and said, "Would you like one of these rooms?" And she said, "Well, how big is it?" and so on. And at that point, I think she only had about a year before opening, but of course, because we were 2 years late in opening, she had a bit longer. And it is the most amazing maze of lead-lined walls with these digital numbering, which comes from, it's a digital translation, if you like, of parts of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the ancient Mesopotamian script. And as you go through, you then come to ancient Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets from David's own collection, which Brigitte built into the piece. So what I'm trying to say is this is the kind of freedom that David gives an artist. She was given a room, she came up with this idea, and he said, build it. And when you go in, actually I won't tell you, because when you go in, it's a big surprise when you get to the middle. Only a couple of people can go in at a time. And it's one of the things about it, of course, is that it's about mathematics, David's greatest interest, and language, which is probably his second greatest interest, I suppose. And this is an image from Matthew Barney's exhibition that we did last year. And Matthew Barney's a really very adventurous, to put it mildly, American artist, filmmaker, sculptor, and he had an exhibition that had been in Munich, came to us and was redone at Mona, and partly because he was able to incorporate all these works from our own collection. So these 4 coffins are from Mona, and they've been built into these cases that Matthew designed, and then there are these strange forms which are quite hard to see on the top, but they're actually sort of skulls that have been they're really made of bubbles of zinc, but they represent skulls, and they're to do with reincarnation or eternal life and rebirth. The stick on the top is the was scepter, which is an Egyptian emblem of the afterlife, but all made by Barney. So again, Barney was able to literally play with the collection in a way that he definitely couldn't do in Munich, and he also wasn't able to do in Los Angeles after the exhibition went there. So Mona's incarnation of that show really was unique. The museum really is quite autobiographical in David, in that he lays himself bare there and he's working things out as he goes along. And I guess we are all doing that too. I'm part of quite a big curatorial team. There's several of us curators, a registrar, a librarian, an exhibition team, a design team, a lighting whiz who we took from the NGV, IT inventors, conservators and so on. The key curatorial people are Nicole Durling, who worked with me at Sotheby's and was the first of 3 of us from Sotheby's who David took to Mona. Now co-director of exhibitions with a colleague who's based in London, Olivier Varenne. I'm the senior research curator, and as Antonia mentioned, I write a lot of interpretive material, and trying to balance, I suppose, what we think it would be helpful for people to know, to encounter these works that we don't want to laden with detailed information, but also to be very respectful of the works of art as well. So we are doing different things with the artworks, but I don't think Mona ever loses touch with the idea that each of these things is a really precious cultural object in its own right. And and that's part of my job, I think, balancing the academic and the Mona. Another colleague who's based in the Melbourne office with me is Elizabeth Pearce, and she does a lot of the writing too. And you'll find when you look at the Mona O, which I'll show you in a minute, which is how we present a lot of the interpretation, that you'll get my voice, David's voice, Elizabeth's voice, sometimes also Jared Rawlins, who's based in Hobart. There's no anonymous voice of the museum at Mona. One of the things that I particularly enjoyed when I came was transforming and working with the works that were already there, such as going through this room over water to see, oh, sorry, I'll come back to that one. Something gone out of order. So this is the mummy of Osiris, an Egyptian who lived around the time of Christ, I guess, in the Roman period of ancient Egypt. And his coffin's never been opened, so we had it scanned at the Hobart Hospital, and you can see this virtual unwrapping. And so one of the things that I really liked about this was David had owned it for quite a while, but he'd never really done a lot of research on what it was, who Osiris was, where these plaster coffins came from. And we were able to, without labouring masses of interpretive material, actually just show people how the wrappings are around the body and so on. And also, I was pleased that we were able to do exactly what his family would have wanted, which is that the reason he was mummified is so that his body would be preserved and his name would be preserved, so that his car and bar, his soul, if you like, can go in and out of his preserved body every day forevermore. So at Hobart, where he may not be forever, everybody knows his name and he's very well looked after. And so I think, again, that we've done something very new with the object, but with really, really utmost respect for why he exists and it exists in the world at all. So I hope other people agree with that. When you do, if you haven't been, and you go to cross the water to look at him, don't fall in the water, which quite a lot of people, I say quite a lot of people, not a high percentage, quite a lot of people do. The plaster mummy, a plaster coffin like this, wouldn't have been especially rare at the time. It's not obviously the most luxurious Tutankhamun kind of coffin, but they are very rare now because obviously if they got wet, they fell to bits, and also because tomb robbers would tend to smash them open to see whether there were amulets and things inside, or just cut off the head to sell the mask. So we're very lucky that he's completely intact. I'm just going to go back to the one I missed. This is just a picture of the Mona Ho, and that's Olivier. So it knows where you are, and it tracks your trip, and you can ignore it completely. Later this year you'll be able to use it on your own phone. At the moment we give people this iPod thing, and it will save your tour. So if you click on something, like somebody has on the artifact, the Barsamian little pink thing shows, you can then get the information on your by email when you're at home. So you don't have to read everything there. You can just kind of get the little bit of information you like, and then you can read what David thinks later, or you can sit in the cafe and have a look and so on. It's a really brilliant system. As one who's worked with labels for much of her career, I think the Mona O is really fantastic because people look at the artwork before they start reading about it or listening. And it was, I should say, invented by our art processors team at Mona, and it's used at the zoo, and it's used at the State Library of New South Wales, and the Gallipoli exhibition that's touring at the moment, and probably will be used overseas shortly too. So, just quickly, what is happening right now? This is the exhibition that just opened last week of Cameron Robbins, who is a Melbourne artist who works with the weather. And literally he has machines which are driven by the wind or by water or other forces, and they draw. So those drawings on the wall are done by various stormy weathers in different places. And he also works with magnetic fields and vortices and other natural forces. And we've got 7 new commissions in that exhibition that will go for a few months. I can't remember the exact closing date, but it's just opened. And then in July we have another exhibition opening which is about optics in art. And then in November we have the exhibition that I'm mostly working on at the moment, which is it's called On the Origin of Art. So it's not a small topic. It's literally looking at why human beings make art at all. Why do we do something that ostensibly wastes time, energy, could be doing other things? Why, since humans began, or arguably before humans began, have we done it? And this is, again, David's fascination with why human beings do the things we do, what makes us tick, what are our deepest origins in evolutionary time. And we've invited 4 scientists, internationally known scientists, to select the works for that exhibition, and we're working with them, which they've done, and we're literally at the stage of plotting it out, and the catalogue's about to go to the printer. So that'll be the 5th of November, it opens, I'm hoping with fireworks. I have to say this was a lesson. When I said, oh, and of course we're having fireworks, half the staff around the table looked at me really blankly, and I thought, you young folks don't even know what I'm talking about. That was a lesson. I still want fireworks. David knew. Anyway, David has said before now that Mona is a philosophy lesson rather than an art gallery. I think it's both. It's certainly a thinking exercise. It's increasingly scientifically oriented, I think, and David has threatened to open a science museum as well. I think we should just evolve as one thing. I don't think, the 2 cultures need to be divided. David was started in science at university before he dropped out to become a professional gambler, and he does still think in a really rigorously scientific way. He wants to have an idea that can be falsified. He doesn't like waffle, and he's very prepared to change his mind about things. Mona deals with big ideas. We want to think about things that push us personally, do them, and we want then to see what happens. We don't have marketing surveys where we try and work out what people want, as some other institutions that I know. And I think I'll end then with another word from the man himself, because I think he, as I mentioned, he says it better than I do. I hope we don't ever get to the point where we dumb everything down to the level where everyone agrees with us or understands.